Sunshine of Your Love. That's, for those who are my vintage would know that's Cream, Eric Clapton and Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce. Thank you and welcome everybody. It's really great that everyone's here, and thank you, Andrew, for the kind introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking the time from your busy schedules to be here. I do want to acknowledge a few people in the room, a couple of my colleagues, the Minister of Training, Colleges and Universities, Marilee Fullerton, and our Minister of Infrastructure, Monty McNaughton. Thank you, Monty. You know, and we have a great team in the Ontario Public Service. I'm honored to be joined by a couple of my colleagues, Karen Hughes, our Acting Deputy Minister, and Mark Rondeau, our Associate Deputy Ministers. We have a couple of chiefs. My Chief of Staff, Carl Baldoff, and the Premier's Chief of Staff, Dean French, are here today. And folks, this is really about team. It's a great team, and I'm also honored to be joined by some of my caucus colleagues. I'm looking at Lindsay Park, MPP for Durham, Deepak, where are you? Deepak, Nan, Amy Fee, I think we have here as well, Logan Kanapathy, and Nina Tangri. Where are you, Nina? Right there, Nina Tangri. Some great, you know, one of the real honors of working in government is you get to work with some great people, and I've just identified a number of people that work hard for all of you every single day, and they really are great people. Now, for many of you who might not know this, at Queen's Park, there's a bit of a thing where often reporters ask me, what's on your tie? And so today I'm going to tell you what's on my tie. It's blue, which I think is appropriate given my political stripe. I have a Canadian flag on here, and I think that's in part acknowledgement to the venerable institution of the Canadian Club. But I also have a moose on here. So ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to talk about the moose in the room, which is very much a Canadian version of elephant in the room, but I thought it was appropriate. I'm going to talk about the challenges that our government inherited, and today I'm going to share with you an important announcement about how we intend to address the challenges through compensation and consultation. You know, you've heard it before, and it's true. Ontario does not have a revenue problem. Ontario has a spending problem. The previous government failed to set clear fiscal priorities, and the approach jeopardized the things that matter the most. The reason, and this is important, the reason we are focused on controlling spending, balancing the budget, and restoring sustainability to government is because that is the only way in this province we can protect that which matters most. And I'm referring, of course, to our hospitals, our schools, our public services, making our neighborhoods safe and making our streets safe. Because balancing the budget and restoring accountability to our finances is not just a fiscal imperative, it is a moral imperative. We owe it to our children, our grandchildren, who for better for worse will have to live with the consequences of the decisions that governments make today. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that unlike past governments in Ontario or the current government in Ottawa, we will not forget that the real victims of deficits and debt are our children and our grandchildren. And I, for one, and I think you would agree, we will not let them down. But this means that we need to have a frank conversation about exactly what fuels the deficit. My friend and colleague, the Minister of Finance, Vic Fedeli, will share our government's budget next week, 1 week from today, and it will include a path to balance. It's going to be an important day in the history of Ontario. But when we talk about controlling spending or managing expenditures, we must realize that a central component to this conversation is public sector compensation. Now, as Minister responsible for the Treasury Board Secretariat, I oversee labor relations with our public sector bargaining agents. And as President of the Treasury Board, I oversee all expenditures of government, and the multi-year planning process, which provides an important foundation for the budget. As such, the confluence of compensation and the ability to pay for the things that matter most is of particular interest to me. In Ontario, the public sector compensation represents roughly half of all government expenditures for provincial employees, totaling $72 billion annually, employing over 1 million people across multiple sectors. This is an area of public policy that we cannot ignore. In 2009, every province had a deficit. Today, provinces like British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Quebec, New Brunswick either have surpluses or have a path to surpluses. And why should Ontario be an outlier? You know, I see my former colleagues from DBRS here, and when I was co-president of DBRS in 2009, in between playing guitar, Andrew, you know, it was a financial crisis around the world. And we got to see all the provinces deal with the same situation, the same economic and financial distress. And provinces such as BC and Quebec and others took action, because it doesn't happen overnight. This is hard work. But one province was an outlier, and that was Ontario. And the team downgraded the credit rating of the province of Ontario in 2009, which was shortly followed by Standard & Poor's the following week. And there's been multiple credit downgrades since. Ladies and gentlemen, responsible fiscal management is serious work and has serious consequences. The decisions made by government, just like those 10 years ago, matter. And it matters to me personally. My mother, who fled Hungary with her family in the 40s, during World War II, in 44, as a kid, 8 or 9 years old, her family took great risks, bombs and bullets overhead, and fled, and their family eventually located here in Canada. My mother's best friend, my godmother, her family did the same thing. So these are kids, and they're risking everything. And her family, my mother's best friend's family, went to Venezuela. And today, my godmother, who's worked for government her whole life, has her pension at risk. Venezuela and Canada had similar economies back in the 40s and 50s. In fact, Venezuela had a better economy and maybe more promise. So the decisions we make today, that we've made in the past, that we make today and we make in the future, really matter. And if you don't value what you have here today, and if those of us who represent us don't make the right decisions, our children will inherit something far worse. We just cannot pass the buck on to them. You know, after 30 years in the private sector, Andrew, you talked about a little bit, most of my career, and I see some of my former colleagues at TD. I was at TD for almost 20 years, including a big chunk of time in New York. I saw what was happening to credit ratings and capital markets for sovereigns around the world. And I was really concerned about what was happening here in Ontario. Now, you can either squawk from the sidelines or you can actually do something about it. And I've decided not to sit on the sidelines and squawk, but to get involved. I decided to do something about it, and that's why I put my name forward to run. Because as you know, poor choices and irresponsible spending has left Ontario with a $15 billion deficit, and we inherited a $338 billion debt from when the McGuinty-Wynne Liberals left office. You know, it's hard to comprehend these numbers. That's 9 zeros after 338. Our debt to GDP, we've inherited a 40.5% debt to GDP. The Wynne Liberals, McGuinty Liberals in 2003 inherited about 27%. And let me tell you, back in the early 1990s, and I do remember those, the debt to GDP of this province was 13%, 1-3. Bob Rae inherited a province at 13%, and within 5 years, it was up to 32%. Things can go south very quickly. That's why these decisions matter. And because of this significant debt, we now pay bondholders $1.4 million of interest an hour. Think about that. That's $30 million a day. That's going to interest. That's going out the door. That's not going to those hospitals and schools and social services. It's not building one road. So in 2003, and I've asked my team this, and I've asked myself this many times, since our debt grew so much and the spending doubled, what have we gotten for $200 billion of extra debt since 2003? Because that's over a doubling of the debt burden. Is your life $200 billion better? The answer is no, not even close. And while government expenditures have doubled over the life of the former Liberal government, did your health care double in quality? Is your children's educational experience twice as good? Did the transit system double in size? Is the economy operating at twice the level it was in 2003? Again, I believe the answer is clear. The answer is no, not even close. Therefore, it's time for a new approach, and one that puts the people at the center of everything we do. J'ai déjà abordé le défi de notre génération. Pour résumer, nous n'avons pas su injecter l'argent des contribuables dans les programmes et services qui comptent le plus, tout en continuant de moderniser l'administration ontarienne. 6 mois se sont écoulés depuis ce discours. Et en tant que président du Conseil de Trésor, après avoir rencontré les parties prenantes et examiné chaque dollar investi par la province, je me rends compte que ce n'était que la pointe de l'iceberg. In a previous speech, I spoke about the challenge of our generation. And to summarize, it is the failure to prioritize precious tax dollars on the programs and services that matter most, while modernizing government. In the 6 months since that speech, from the vantage point of the President of the Treasury Board, in meeting with stakeholders and weighing every single expenditure that our government has made, I realize now it is far deeper than that. Because in addition to protecting what matters most, we must concern ourselves with confronting intergenerational inequity and doing everything in our power to cushion future financial and economic shocks. Now, that's not ideology speaking. It's about prudence, it's about fairness, and it's about responsibility. And one of our first decisions as a government was announcing that we would launch an independent financial commission of inquiry to look into the government's past budget practices, alongside an external review, a line-by-line review of government spending by EY Canada. And from those reports came some really compelling data. For one, we learned that had expenditures increased in line with population growth, 2017-2018 expenditures would have been, over 15 years, $330 billion lower if we had just increased expenditures in line with population growth. That's right, because a basic sense of fiscal prudence, we could have virtually repaid the entire provincial debt. And in this province, we are blessed with abundant resources and economic wealth. Yet our province is now the most indebted subnational jurisdiction in the world. Our home, right here in Ontario. Simply put, that puts our autonomy and our freedom at risk, and it doesn't allow us to protect what matters most. Now let's go back to a central pivot of my remarks here today, which is expenditure management and the role of compensation. Let me be clear, our public sector workers have earned their generous compensation. I'm amazed every day by their hard work, dedication, and diligence. But we must be honest about what we can reasonably afford while ensuring the sustainability of government programs and services. Last week, I tabled the 2018 Public Sector Salary Disclosure, more commonly known as the Sunshine List. I suspect some of you may have been on it. In 2018 alone, the number of employees making over $100,000 increased by over 20,000 people in the last year. Since 2003, the list has grown by 600% and is now over 150,000 individuals. In fact, if you lived in Ontario 15 years ago and you didn't work in the public sector, your income, on average, would have been 30% lower than the average Ontario public sector employee. Today, that gap is still the same. It's no surprise that Canada's Parliamentary Budget Officer has indicated that Ontario's current fiscal policies are simply not sustainable over the long term. I talk about this every day in my work as President of the Treasury Board. I talk about the numbers so much that when folks struggle with my name, they just say, he's the numbers guy. And I'll tell you, these numbers are just as sobering to talk about now as they were when I first started talking about them back in 2009 when I was working at DBRS. But things are starting to look up because we have a plan, and it's a plan for the people. Ours is a plan to modernize, to find efficiencies, and protect programs and services. 8 months after since being elected, we've cut the deficit by $1.5 billion, bringing it down to $13.5 billion. But folks, we're not going to stop there. This past summer, our government received feedback through an extensive Planning for Prosperity consultation process, where we received over 26,000 ideas for change. And as the President of the Treasury Board, I'm proud to stand here today and say our government is continuing to listen to the people of Ontario and that we are delivering on our campaign commitments. I'm just going to highlight a few things that we have done so far. We've moved to centralized procurement across the public sector, saving the people a projected $1 billion in 5 years. That's without one job loss. Just last month, we announced reforms to the electricity system to drive efficiencies and lower electricity rates for medium and large employers so that they can continue to grow their businesses and create jobs. We promised we would create and protect better paying jobs, including those skilled white-collar jobs of the future. And we're bringing quality jobs back to Ontario by cutting red tape. In fact, our government is working hard to reduce red tape by 25% by the year 2022. We promised to end hallway health care. On this, I would note the Minister of Health, Christine Elliott, has announced that our government has already allocated over 7,000 long-term care beds, fulfilling almost half of our commitment toward bringing in 15,000 new long-term care spaces over 5 years. More recently, the Minister delivered a modernization plan to fix the healthcare system by focusing on the patient and families in a way that serves their needs better. We've implemented a hiring freeze, with the exception of essential frontline services, as well as a freeze on discretionary spending, restrictions on travel, meal, and hospitality spending. We paused all pending compensation adjustments for all public sector executives while a full review takes place. And in December, we created a brand new Audit and Accountability Committee. This is a new subcommittee of Treasury Board that will oversee internal audit services and ensure more scrutiny and discipline in our fiscal process. So as you can see, we've been very, very busy. And the bottom line of all this is that we will continue to take steps like this, which will restore sustainability to the province's finances now and for years to come. It's been almost a year since we were elected, and we're taking stock of everything we learned in 2018 and putting it into practice. We're modernizing programs and services, breaking down silos across all of government. And by the way, I've learned that some of the silos are not just solid silos, they're concrete and steel reinforced silos. As many of you in business might know, collaborating and working together is hard and serious work, and you have to work at it. But we're being strategic with every taxpayer dollar. That's what we were elected to do. And that is why I'm announcing today that this spring, our Government for the People will commence a new series of consultations with a specific focus on our public sector bargaining agents throughout the Ontario Public Service and the broader public sector. Our goal will be to explore how compensation growth can be managed in a way that results in wage settlements that are modest, reasonable, and most importantly, sustainable. C'est pourquoi j'annonce aujourd'hui que ce printemps, le gouvernement pour la population lancera une nouvelle série de consultations auprès des agents négociateurs du secteur public. L'objectif, savoir comment gérer l'augmentation de la rémunération de manière à aboutir à des règlements salariaux modestes, raisonnables et surtout viables. We are beginning a conversation. Feedback received through these discussions will, with our province's public sector employees and bargaining agents, will directly inform our government's next steps to responsibly manage growth in compensation. Examples of these next steps could include measures such as voluntary agreement to wage outcomes lower than the current trend, trade-offs that will lead to reductions in compensation costs, and consideration of legislative measures. These are just examples. We are looking forward to an engaged and collaborative consultations, and all options are on the table. And may I repeat that, all options are on the table. Today, bargaining agents and employers alike will receive detailed invitations outlining the specific questions we are looking to address during these consultations. And I'm confident that we can work together to ensure that every taxpayer dollar invested is done so in a fair and sustainable way. As our government continues to deliver relief to families, we are putting the people first by leveraging our service delivery partners, collective knowledge, and ideas. As we know that programs and services have been put at risk by allowing the deficit to spiral out of control. This harms all of us and puts our most vulnerable at risk. So just as I started with why, I would like to end with why. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenge of our generation is to make choices that protect what matters most, like frontline programs and services, while confronting intergenerational inequity and future financial shocks. This is a province-building moment. If done right, this will see a more sustainable Ontario for this generation and for future generations. But this will take all of us working together to ensure that at all times we are keeping the people at the center of every decision. After all, the management of public finances is not just a fiscal imperative, it's a moral imperative. I want to thank each and every one of you for your support. Merci beaucoup, and thank you again for being here today.